Hi, in this video we're going to look at how to connect Power BI or Excel to an Excel file or folder of Excel files stored on Sharepoint through PowerQuery. Now there are three options to choose from. Firstly, you can use the Excel file connector or the folder connector. In order to do this, you need to make sure that you can browse for the folder or Excel file that you'd like to connect to. Now that means that you need to be able to access SharePoint folders through Windows Explorer because PowerQuery in Power BI and in Excel opens Windows Explorer to find the folder or file you need or that you want to connect to when you're using the file connector or the folder connector. Now it's actually quite straightforward to bring in your SharePoint folder into Windows Explorer. All you need to do is go to the SharePoint folder that you want to connect to on your web browser and then in the ribbon click Sync. This then synchronizes the SharePoint folder with Windows Explorer, and the next time you go into Windows Explorer, you'll be able to see the SharePoint folder come up on the left-hand side of the Explorer. Once you've done that synchronization, then you can use the Excel connector or the folder connector and browse for the folder that you want. However, there is a disadvantage to using these two options. If you'd like to take advantage of Power BI's ability to schedule automatic refreshing, then you have to use something called a gateway to allow this automatic refreshing with the Excel file connector or folder connector to occur. So a gateway is a piece of software that's installed on a single computer that allows Power BI Online to access files or folders of files that are not on a permanently online service. Now, in order for the gateway to work, the computer where the gateway is stored needs to always be on and always logged in. Now this means that automatic refreshing probably can't happen overnight or on weekends when an employee computer is likely to be turned off. Also, IT teams tend to frown upon the installation of such software on employees' computers, and after all they tend to have the final say on what gets installed, so there's no guarantee you'll be able to use a gateway. Now alternatively, you can use the SharePoint folder connector. The SharePoint folder connector still allows you to access the same Excel files and folders that are on SharePoint that you could access through the Excel file or the folder connector, but you're able to perform automatic refreshing without the need for a gateway because SharePoint's always online. So how do we connect to SharePoint using the SharePoint folder connector? Okay, so straight away in Power BI, what we need to do is go to Get Data, and then find the SharePoint folder connector. Now that doesn't generally come out straight away, so we just need to go to More at the bottom. And then there it is on the right hand side, SharePoint folder. Okay, we then get a request to put in the SharePoint root URL. So what is a root URL? Well, generally, when people try to connect to a SharePoint folder through the SharePoint folder connector for the first time, they try and put in the exact URL of the folder that they want to connect to. Now that won't work, and what we need to do is use the root URL instead. So all SharePoint pathways start in the same way. We start with HTTPS, then a colon, and 2 forward slashes. And then we put in the company name. Then a dot, and then sharepoint.com. After that, we put in a forward slash, and then the word sites, then another forward slash, and then the site name. Finally, we finish with a forward slash. Now, the site name frequently will be a department, so you might have finance or HR, or it might be sales or marketing, or something like that that the IT team can restrict access to for different employees. So this is what we need to put in for the root URL for SharePoint to be able to find the root of the SharePoint folder that we will then eventually go and find later on. Now, a couple of points here. Don't try and use www instead of HTTPS. That won't work. Also, don't forget to put the forward slash at the end of the root URL, and that's enough for the SharePoint folder connector not to work. Okay, once you've put in your root URL, a SharePoint pop-up menu comes up saying, please give us your sign-in information to make sure that you've got access to the folder that you're trying to connect to. Now, normally at this point, we use the Microsoft account option on the left-hand side. You can then click sign in and put in your company credentials. Now, if that doesn't work for you, you can try and use the Windows option instead, but the best thing to do is contact your IT team to see perhaps if there's something they can do to help you connect. Once you've got in the right information, then just click connect. Now, once you've clicked on Connect, then you'll be taken to a screen that shows a list of the files that are within SharePoint, and all you need to do is click on Transform Data. Great. From this point, the SharePoint folder connector works pretty much exactly the same way as the normal folder connector. The only difference is that generally when connecting through the folder connector, you tell PowerQuery the exact folder that you want to connect to. Now, of course, we haven't done that in the SharePoint folder connector. We've just given PowerQuery the root URL of the SharePoint folders that we want to connect to. And now we need to go and tell PowerQuery exactly which folder we want to connect to. Now that's easy enough. All I need to do is scroll across to the right-hand side of the screen. And we then have a folder path column. Now, full disclosure here is that I don't have a SharePoint site to use here, so I'm using a folder connector to just demonstrate exactly what happens when you use the folder connector. Now, what we need to do is tell PowerQuery exactly which folder we want to connect to. Now, to do this, we can click on the drop-down arrow. And then we can see in the drop-down menu that we've got a whole list of folder paths which are available to us. Now, we can search through the folder paths manually and find the one that we want, but there's a couple of problems with doing that. If we click load more, then we'll get all of the folder paths that Power BI will show us, but that might only be the first 1,000 rows or the first 1,000 values. If you've got more than 1,000 values or more than 1,000 folder pathways in SharePoint underneath your URL, then it's possible that you won't find the pathway that you want through searching manually. Secondly, we also find that if we scroll across to the right-hand side in the drop-down menu, we also can't see all of the folder pathway all the time. So a better option is to use the text filters option. Now from here, we can use contains. Once we've got the filtered rows menu, we just put in the word that's in the final folder pathway of the folder that we want to connect to. So for me, I'm going to type in datasets. Now, be careful here. You need to make sure that you're using capitals as the folder pathway appears in Windows Explorer or in your root URL. So for example, I'm going to type in datasets with a capital D, and that's only going to find folder pathways which has got datasets with a capital D in it. It won't return datasets with a lowercase d. Okay, that's good. We've now narrowed down the rows that we're looking for, but we've still got a few rows that we don't want. And you can see if you look in the folder path, then not all the folder paths are the same. So from here, you could put in the exact folder path that you want, or from here, you could then search manually for the folder pathway that you want. Okay, now we're only left with the rows that I want to connect to. So to then combine all these files, I'll scroll back across to the left-hand side. And then go to Content. And then select the Combine button. Now from there, of course, we just do what we normally have to do with a folder. So I select the parameter that I want to connect to, so the sheet that's in each of the files that I want to connect to. The preview evaluates on the right-hand side to show me the data that's within the first file, in this case, of the folders that I'm trying to connect to. And there we go. That's how to connect through your SharePoint folder connector.